Dialogue. Dialogue, a presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.
This is Dialogue Assassination with research specialist Mae Bressel.
Yeah, I just thought you all might appreciate that 1970s cool intro to Mae's show. She used that one, I think, in 1971. The intro's kind of changed a little bit over time. What I wanted to cover tonight was a broadcast from November 9th, 1987. Remember, she passed away in 1988 from a fast-acting cancer. And Amos, one of our participants, listeners, had suggested that he wanted to cover the Presidio, and that was in 1987. So we're going to jump there. And what Mae says about the Presidio is that the common denominator is that all the people who've been abused and whose children have been abused is that law enforcement has done nothing. And we'll get further into the what is the Presidio and what was going on there. But I wanted to cover like a couple of the tools and start to work through some of the grammar of building out these investigations and some of the ways that Mae did it and some of the ways that we're doing it here as well. So we use the Miro board, but also we use the brain database. And at one point I had gone through and I started to log their Mae's episodes. So listening to them and then just cranking the names and the connections into the brain database. And this is the brain.com. There's a free version that you can use, and it's very helpful, really easy to use. And it, I've been building this one on and off for maybe 10 years. And I think there's maybe 10,000 entries or so in there, but here's episode 831, November 9th, 1987. And the first character is Colonel Michael Aquino. And we'll get into him in just a minute. And some, just to get an idea, he worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency. I have him marked as a pedophile and MK Ultra. He was in the Phoenix program in Vietnam. He worked for the 306th PSYOP Battalion. Later, its parent, the 7th PSYOP Group. And he had a lot of specific specialized assignments. And we'll hear a clip from him later. He was quite the character. And he ran the Church of Set. So he was a Satanist. And he was connected to various intelligence characters. And you can see here, I have him tied to the Franklin cover-up, to Iran Contra, to Larry King, and let's see who else we got him tied to. MK Ultra. Yeah, he went on Oprah Winfrey show on the Phoenix program and the Presidio Child Development Center. And that's kind of some of what we're going to cover tonight is that Presidio Child Development Center. So the Presidio Day Care, really. So let's go into the sources a little bit. And this is a Miro board, which you all can join. And I find it to be just fantastic. What I like to do is gather all the grammar. So dump everything out that I do in a research into a board like this, and then organize it, follow the grammar, logic, and rhetoric pattern. So first thing is who's who. Let's define the events, define the terms, define the people. And then how do they fit together? What is the logic of all of these events? And it's hard to follow sometimes when Mae's talking because she's rifling names so fast. So what I think we could do for the first clip is play a little bit and then just ask you guys to keep track of what you recognize. And if you want to, you could just start a notepad. You can grab a shape, or you can just grab a notepad over here. Actually, it's probably easier. And then start typing if you have any names or things that you want to go back and cover or investigate. And that's kind of how I start to run it here. I'll put a couple notepads on there for you guys. Sticky notes. Hang on, what happened? Where'd my sticky notes go? Well, you can just start typing in here too. Just make a little spot for some notes. All right, I'm going to play a little bit of this clip and just want you guys to listen with a critical ear and see what you come up with. And this is, again, this is from 1987, November 1987. And she's talking about Michael Aquino, the Presidio Day Care, and quite a few other things. So let's see if we can get out of this brief clip.
A satanic church in New York City, and she lives, they have a home in San Francisco when he was stationed there. And I'm going into these articles because they're long and they're detailed, but I want to tell you where I'm leading to so you have some idea of what this story is. He's in the Army Reserve. He's a lieutenant colonel like Oliver North. He's currently assigned as staff officers for the U.S. Army Reserve Personnel Center in St. Louis, Missouri. This little 3.5-year-old girl was one of a group of children. There's about 10 out of 55 abused children, and a gentleman on the Presidio named Gary Hambright is answering charges to only 10 of the children. That's the first collusion of the prosecution to not bring in 50. If out of 100 children, 50 were abused, sexually abused, and participated in satanic rites, the prosecution on the Presidio, which is the military part of it, has decided to limit the case to Gary Hambright. But this little girl was at the shopping center at the Presidio, and she recognized two people. And she told her parents, she's just 3.5 then, she's 4 now, that was Mickey, and the man was Mickey, and the woman was Shamby. And she grabbed her father by the legs and was very scared and suggested that they did terrible things to her and took her off the base. Mickey and Shamby were Michael and Lilith Aquino. She said she recognized them, and she gave them details of where they took her and put her in a bathtub with animal figurations on the corner of the tub and an all-black room, and that she had been injected and taken off the Army base at the Presidio to Leavenworth Drive in San Francisco. And she described all 4 walls are black, and the men were dressed as women. Those were their capes, the satanic witchcraft capes, and the woman was dressed as a man. So a search warrant was given to go into the apartment, and there were the black walls, all black walls, and there was a cross over the ceiling, which she described, and the bathtub that she said she was put in, and the clothing of these people, the Michael and Lilith Aquino. And the matter stands right now that because she was taken from a military base to a home in San Francisco, that the San Francisco police have to prosecute. But the man she was taken to is very high up in the United States military, and she was taken from a military base, and the San Francisco police are not yet charging him or her with anything, even though the child gave a 100% accurate description of what the place looked like, the ceiling, the walls, the tub, the clothing were there. The police picked up videotapes and records, all kinds of material from their computer, and have decided to stay away. The prosecutor of the Presidio sexual molestation against Gary Hambright has said, and I'll put his name and their names on the air in the weeks to come so you get to know them, at least to remember them if you want to play this back, and maybe they'll get great appointments by Ronald Reagan's successor someday. But anyway, the people involved that she described are not yet wanted by the San Francisco police. This is identical to Son of Sam Manson family and all the other horror stories that I have studied through the years.
So what she's coming up with is that Gary Hambrick, this guy, and I'm going to have to look up his name, but he's taken the fall for the military industrial complex. And, they have a 3-year-old girl that I think it was 3-year-old, at least in the next case that we're going to talk about. So let's say, 3 to 6-year-old girl who recognizes Michael Aquino in the grocery store as her abuser and describes the place and the events where she was abused. And then they go and they see that everything that she said was true. And they're not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole from a prosecution standpoint. So very frustrating for May at that point. And this is like the notes that she goes through. So these are sources that she uses, the bibliography, and she does one of these for each week. And this is a rich place to go and dig for information in all of these. A lot of them are like articles or newspaper articles or periodicals. And yes, San Francisco Examiner, satanic sect leader linked to Presidio Daycare probe, molesting rituals reported, Presidio child abuse case, San Francisco Chronicle. Army says Constitution lets Satanists hold top secret jobs, San Francisco Chronicle. Presidio Satanists, a scary insignia to observers, San Francisco Examiner, San Jose Mercury. So she's taking like mainstream sources for what's going on out there. So it's kind of, it would be difficult to call that a theory when it's coming from these mainstream sources. And what I might do as part of my research is just do a quick search on Presidio. And just to see like what comes up. So I remember, FBI, LA Times, FBI investigates Presidio child molestation. And I remember being out in San Francisco to visit my brother, and I jogged right past this Presidio. And what we might do is just put a picture of it in here. I remember it was the top of a big hill, and you could kind of see where, I'm not sure exactly where the daycare is, but this is like a military base up on the top of the hill overlooking San Francisco Bay. So pretty prime real estate. I don't know. I like to get an idea of like where these places are. To just get a feel, and I might put a map in here as well, just so you can see what we're dealing with. So guys, was there anything else that you picked up out of that clip that was interesting? Any other names or anything? All right, well, so far I'm going to go with Gary Hambright and Mickey and Shamby. And okay, so here is the next clip. And this is going to be, hold on a second, make sure we get this shared correctly.
LeVay studied criminology in San Francisco and worked in the San Francisco Police Department crime lab. He also worked as an informant for Interpol. Prior to the Church of Satan, LeVay ran a group called the Magic Circle. LeVay's most famous associate is the National Security Agency General Michael Aquino. At the time of his membership in LeVay's group, Aquino was an Army specialist in intelligence and psychological warfare. In 1973, he became the executive officer of the 306th Psychological Operations Battalion, contemporary with his founding of the Church of Set. General Michael Aquino wrote, "From PSYOP to Mind War, the Psychology of Victory." Aquino's thesis stated that enemy populations could be subdued by inflicting a state of psychological terror and feelings of imminent destruction. He discusses the use of psychotronic weapons or electromagnetic weapons that influence the mind. Capitulation could be induced without firing a shot by extremely low-frequency signals piggybacked on broadcasts of radio, TV, or microwave communications in order to influence and manipulate the thoughts and feelings of the target population. During the 1960s, he was prominent in the Church of Satan and a close friend of Anton LaVey until he started his own Church of Set. A police intelligence report dated July 1st, 1981 reads, quote, "The Church of Set is a group of hundreds of members that operates on a national level. Michael Aquino is the official head and rules through a council of 9 who are in fact his lieutenants," unquote. At least 2 members of the Council of 9 at that time were members of Army intelligence. In the late 1980s, Aquino was accused by the San Francisco Police Department of being involved in a satanic child molestation ring centered on the daycare at the Presidio military base where Aquino was stationed at the time. Probable victims numbered at 68, many of whom had contracted venereal disease. 22 families filed $66 million in claims against the Army, claiming that criminal charges against Michael Aquino were dropped due to pressure from the Army. General Aquino admitted to renting the German castle where the Nazi SS were formed and reenacting the secret ceremony among fellow intelligence officers dressed in full Nazi regalia. It is important to remember that General Aquino is first and foremost a military intelligence officer with over 40 years' experience in counterinsurgency operations and an expert in psychological warfare. General Aquino's psychological warfare campaign has started or infiltrated cults and other closed systems as part of a concerted effort to control large numbers of people and to destabilize the centers of constitutional and legal authority, both here in the United States and in other nations. This methodology is part of a concerted plan that spans several generations. The Church of Satan and the Church of Set, as well as other cults and mainstream organizations, are closed systems. Aquino first participated in MKUltra-related activities in Vietnam as part of the Phoenix program in the 1960s. These ongoing MKUltra operations are functioning as a counterinsurgency and infiltration operation aimed at destabilizing the United States and other industrialized nations. The following cults have been used by General Aquino or his associates to continue MKUltra operations outside of the laboratory. The mass suicides at Jonestown of 890 people had similar threads, a cult with sinister connections. Jim Jones, who had connections to the CIA, set up his utopian experiment on the same land the CIA had used to train mercenaries to fight in Angola. According to investigators, the Jonestown experiment was conceived of by Dr. Lawrence Laird Layton, staffed by him and financed by Layton. The African-American cult had at its core a Caucasian inner council composed of Layton and his family. Layton was a chemist in the Manhattan Project and head of the Army's Chemical Warfare Research Division in the 1950s. The People's Temple cult took over the Mendocino State Hospital as a part of a government pilot project to evaluate the feasibility of deinstitutionalizing mental patients. After a reduction in state funding, most of the patients at the Mendocino State Psychiatric Hospital were released into the custody of the People's Temple. Congressman Leo Ryan was assassinated in his attempt to investigate the cult. The pathologist in Guyana reported 80 to 90% of the victims' bodies had fresh needle marks. Other victims had been shot or strangled. In 1981, the survivors sued the former head of the CIA for, quote, enhancing the economic and political powers of James Warren Jones, unquote, and of conducting mind control.
Yeah, so I'd like to find the other part of that video, because I think he goes on to talk about other cults that Michael Aquino was involved in, and we just kind of finished Jonestown, and it was interesting to hear that he was involved in that as well, and then also validate some of the other assumptions that we made about the Jonestown massacre and Jim Jones being involved in MK Ultra. But I just wanted to go through like some of the things that I pulled out of that video that I would go research. So this is the Presidio Day Care Scandal that May is talking about, and yeah, Michael Aquino on Oprah. So this was like the second half where they were kind of given his resume, and so he was a Church of Set founder or head, and they had a council of 9 members. So I'd like to know like who those members are and what the heck is the Church of Set Satanist organization. And he was the commanding officer for the 306 Psychological Battalion. What's the history of that battalion? What type of operations were they involved in? That also mentioned MK Ultra and the Phoenix program and the Nazi connections, Jonestown, and then Lawrence Layton and the Layton family, the Manhattan Project, and the People's Temple cult. And May makes a point of like connecting all of these operations in California, and one of the commenters on this video said when Manson said the government made him what he was, this is what he was talking about. Manson was put in an orphanage that Aquino was using for child trafficking. So they're saying research the Franklin Institute and you'll see for yourself. So these spider webs of connections just continue to grow. And as we put the tiles in to the mosaic, the connections and the bigger picture just keeps growing and growing. So is there anything else in that clip that you all noticed or wanted to call attention to?
I had no idea that Michael Aquino was connected with, I knew about him. I didn't know that he was connected with Jonestown at all. And it's kind of disturbing, to come to the realization that these things were sort of government operations and not organically developed. I think that's what jumps out at me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very, very disturbing. Yeah, I think as we started to investigate these things and make more and more connections, I feel like I have to wash off after we get done with some of these investigations.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's kind of gross, and I'm looking at your brain model down here. What's the connection between Aquino and Oprah Winfrey? I didn't know about that.
Well, he was on the show, right? He was on
okay.
Oprah Winfrey and he was interviewed, and here's a link to that.
I mean, just the fact that this freak show is like holding a position in the military and they know about, the clip I remember seeing is where he says, look, the military knows about my religion. It's just another religion, just like any other religion. And, I'm able to practice my religion. They don't seem to have a problem with it.
Yeah, that's here on Oprah.
Yeah.
But he did that. Yeah. Yep. Kind of disgusting.
Well, the thing that the question I got is when they're talking about him in the membership of the Church of Satan and Anton LaVey, they say he's an enlisted or a specialist. That's a enlisted rank. That's like E4, E5, E6. The specialist kind of went away somewhere in the 70s, or the E4 stayed in past the 70s, but E5 there was a specialist like advanced class that was an E5 and an E6. But if he was in charge of a psychological battalion as a colonel, that's quite a bit of a difference. That's like a 05, 06. Yeah, I think 06, which is quite a jump from an E4, E5. So I'm wondering about like when that all transpired.
Is he still alive, Aquino?
I don't think so. Let's check that out. Oh, they're doing Temple of Set. I don't know if I can find out. You all have a link. Google
Cool,
probably
yeah.
tell me.
I'll look too.
Let's see.
Yeah, I guess I kind of mentally, when I learned about this guy, sort of dismissed him as kind of a wackadoodle and like, why do we care? But now I'm coming to an understanding that they were using him to do all kinds of disturbing stuff.
Who's that? The Aquino?
The military, I mean, well, whatever he was involved in.
Yeah, so they're saying 1946 and maybe still alive.
Yeah, I never heard about his demise. I'm wondering what the heck he's up to. I did know about him going to that castle and recreating some satanic Nazi stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd heard about that, and I'm like, well, he's just a weirdo. I mean, whatever. But he's also on the U.S. payroll. That's a problem.
Yeah, how does that work? And you can read his document. I linked it here, From PSYOP to Mind War, the Psychology of Victory. And I kind of browsed it, and it seems quite mainstream, actually. There wasn't too much weirdness in there, but it might be worth taking a quick peek if you have time. But that's like, as I would build out this board, I would probably read through that and try to pull a few meaningful quotes and any information that would be interesting. All right. Well, Michael, did you have anything else?
Well, maybe like looking at that other document there, there was something about specialization of psychology, and maybe I just misheard what was said there, but it sounded to me like they said he was a specialist, and that's a particular rank, but that may be just my misunderstanding.
Yeah. So it'd be good to understand like what was his rank, because they're calling him Colonel Aquino. So
Yeah.
we can probably do a little bit of research and figure that out. Okay. Well, I want to play a little bit more May when she gets to Anton LaVey, so we can learn a little bit about that character. And let's see, that comes in and around.
Oh yeah, isn't LaVey's sister, wasn't she kind of active somehow too? I've seen videos of them.
Typically they're families, right, that do
Yeah.
this stuff. All right, let's see what we can dig out of this clip here. Here we go.
And just hold this up and visualize this man getting children whose parents are working, who leave them at a military day school, and they're injected and taken to this man's apartment where the rituals begin. He believes and writes about the coming apocalypse, that there will be an annihilation. Practically most everyone will die, except for a very few elect. And he's advising the NATO, and he works with psychological operations, top secret security clearances, and is ready with the military, and he's in the military with the reserves right now, believes that this great Armageddon is going to come and that there will be annihilation of a lot of people. He's the leader of the Temple of the Set, the Satanic Church, headquartered in San Francisco. He worked with Anton LaVey until 1975. LaVey makes the connections, and when he was working with him through those years, to Roman Polanski, to the Sharon Tate murder, to the Manson family, to David Berkowitz, to a murder at Stanford campus of the Peroff girl, the year before to the Perloff girl, and I'll go into their murders. I had those matters on the air in 1977-78 on my programs on World Watchers, and Anton LaVey was the advisor for Roman Polanski's movie when he made the Rosemary's Baby. And then the same people worked with Manson, who killed Sharon Tate and she was pregnant with a baby, and 5 other people, and then the next night killed the LaBiancas and made a grand score of 8 people while they wrote Helter Skelter to make it look like the Beatles were associated with the violence. And if that wasn't enough, they left the credit cards of Bianca's and others in the black part of town to make it look like black people did these murders. I've done years of broadcasting, but I'm going to update it now for new listeners and people who weren't listening to World Watchers back in those days, and show how those materials are coming together now.
Yeah, so I mean, it's incredible. Like May is making these links again back to the satanic ritual abuse, Anton LaVey, and the Manson family, which we've talked about before, and the Sharon Tate murder and the Roman Polanski murder. The Sharon Tate murders at the house, and she was married to Roman Polanski, and you might remember that he had to flee the United States because he was involved in some statutory rape, which isn't surprising given the circles that these people run in. And then Anton LaVey was involved in the making of that satanic movie, Rosemary's Baby. He worked for Interpol, which is, for all intents and purposes, came out of the Nazi intelligence regime and Reinhard Gehlen. I don't know what the magic circle is. I'd like to know more about that. He worked at the San Francisco crime lab. He had, what were his ties to MK Ultra, and more specifically his ties to General Aquino and the Presidio Day Care in this space. Do you all know have anything more on Anton LaVey? I know, Mark, you had talked about his sister potentially being involved in these events.
It's a fuzzy memory. I may be wrong. I'm going to have to check myself, but I thought I remembered seeing something on him. and it stuck in my mind that it was a family thing. But I know that's not surprising with a lot of these characters. I would have to look at that.
Just do a quick look.
Xena, that's it.
Zeno LeVay. Okay.
Very, yeah, interestingly, my wife's sister named her dog Xena, and it made me look her up. And yes, Church of Satan, yeah, and she's a weirdo too.
Yeah, so we'll drop her in. We got her tagged. Yeah. I'm sure we could learn. This is his daughter.
Oh, maybe that's it. Maybe it was a daughter.
Yeah,
bad.
1963. Yeah. A contemporary of ours.
Yeah, no kidding. She's only 3 years older than me.
Yeah, so I'd like to know more about this magic circle and then the Council of Nine, Aquino's Council of Nine. Maybe there's something there, right? And I don't know if I have anything in the brain on. I don't think I do, but
Yeah, I'd like to know who those people are. Aquino.
yeah, I don't see anything there. Yeah, he is. I mean, this is some rich opportunity for research. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was saying that I kind of like to like throw all these names in the hopper and then like deep dive, maybe do like 8 or 10 hours of research around these people and these connections, kind of build it out a little bit. So get the grammar right, like who are these people? When did they live? Who are they connected to? What were they involved in? And what kind of craziness were they getting into? And then try to gather all that up so into a logical order and then be able to tell a story. So the part of my plan for self-improvement was by doing this over and over was to get better and better at doing the grammar, the logic, and the rhetoric about putting these things together. So
Looking pretty good from my chair, pal.
well, this is our grammar part, right? We've been doing the rhetoric part and trying to get it together, and also using the tools because there are tools available, and learning how to use this mural board. And I think the nice part is this infinite canvas, right? So I can put the other boards in.
Wow, that is pretty cool.
We could just zoom out, and these are some of the other topics that we did, like Jim Jones timeline, did 3 weeks on Jim Jones and Jonestown and SLA as the CIA and all these things. It's amazing like how they interconnect, especially in California and with the military industrial.
It's funny. It gives you, so my impression is it's both bigger and smaller than I thought, right? At first you're like, oh my God, these things are all connected. And then you're like, wait a minute now, we're just talking about a small group of people. A relatively small group of people that are connected to all of this crap.
Yeah.
A few hundred or something, but it's like you can wrap your arms around it.
Well, there's that. And then like being able to talk with Juliet Engel, right, about her satanic ritual abuse and tie it back into these things. She was like, oh, Charlie Manson, he was the AV guy on the Vito and the Freak Dancers programs in Laurel Canyon. Like, what? So being able to touch out and do history, right? All the stuff impacts us. And then, I mean, the Jonestown piece and Leo Ryan and tying that back to some family connections, all that stuff it does impact you. And I think that kind of one of May's points, right? Like this stuff does impact you, whether you think it does or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it impacts everybody through time, our kids, the stuff, even the crap that how they try to popularize the sort of the dark occult satanic stuff and make it cool to the young kids. There was a time when, my son was, he's 12 now, maybe he was 8, 9. sort of getting into the Star Wars thing. He's like, Dad, I want to be Darth Vader. He's way cooler than Luke Skywalker.
Right,
I'm like, for fuck's sake, you don't want to be the bad guy.
That's right. No, you definitely don't. But they make it look so attractive,
Right.
Come to the dark side. That's the deal. All right, I was going to play a little bit more, one more clip maybe, and then we'll cut the clips, because this is a 2.5 hour
Yeah.
set, but I want to try to get us into it about an hour. So let's see what she has to say here.
AHNENERBE, that were two fanatical right-wing groups described in the newspapers that I listed for you. They are Aryan groups that existed before and during Hitler's reign. They started before, and they were linked to the Thule Society and the knighthood that is very much alive in Washington and in San Francisco with little kiddies and all around the country at military bases. Now, Aquino book list that he has for reading for his Church of Set, he's the high priest, includes Mein Kampf, Hitler, the Occult Messiah, the Occult Roots of Nazism. Children from the Presidio Day Care Center, as I say, were taken. This one little girl is the only one. If the prosecutor has asked the others, I don't know. There's 10 people that the Daycare Center caretaker, Gary Hambert, is charged with sexually molesting. I don't know how many went to the home. It could have been the 50 that were molested, but they're talking about one. With the Kennedy assassination, there was one man. It was Oswald. With World War II, it was one man, Adolf Hitler. There's always one person. With Watergate, there was one man, Richard Nixon. These very complex plots are reduced to one. Now, as I said, the San Francisco police raided the apartment of Aquino and his wife and found exactly what the children were describing. And he is still in St. Louis. He has his top security clearance. He worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, which was the agency set up by Daniel Graham, was the chief of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he worked there in 1981. And I have to look up, forgot to do it when I came in today, the years that Daniel Graham was head of the DIA, because Daniel Graham shares offices with the Fritz Kramer. Hitler's general was in the Waffen SS. Otto von Bolschwing was up in Palo Alto with 8 years behind him and a secretary translator working for Ronald Reagan of the Waffen SS, and he was put in the OSS. And Fritz Kramer was Hitler's Fritz Kramer, prisoner number 33. And there's a lot of witchcraft, and number 666 comes through. They're asking the children if they've seen these numbers. That Fritz Kramer from the Waffen SS has taken a disappearance since World War II. And I believe it's entirely possible and almost impossible that it wasn't the man who shares offices with Daniel Graham. I've said these things are important for many, many years. And I think it's very hard for the listener to comprehend the breadth. Is not your fault. It's a hard subject, but the breadth.
I love that. It's very hard for the listener to comprehend the breadth. It's not your fault. It's a hard subject. Yeah, it is a hard subject, and it is hard to comprehend, and you have to be open-minded and willing to listen in the first place. Now, the 2 points that I wanted to take from that clip are that, they always blame it on one person, and then they fence off all of the other people. So somebody takes the fall. There's a patsy. Even when the evidence is overwhelming against Aquino and his wife, they're not going to take the hit for that. And then it's also very interesting how she ties it back to the Nazi ties. And that's one thing that May does, and I've become like more and more acquainted with, and I'll keep mentioning it, the Nazi ties. And it sounds fanciful or far-fetched, but once you begin to understand that after World War II, the Reinhard Gehlen offered his East Intelligence operation in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. They had all the spies in place from Hitler's spy operation, and they just changed the nameplate. Like, he offered that to Allen Dulles, and they just switched from German intelligence to CIA, and that's what became the Interpol and the the German intelligence, and they actually brought him and the scientists who were doing these mind control and experiments on people in the concentration camps, the captive audience, over to the United States and continued them in prisons, in psych wards, and that became MK Ultra. And she draws the connections at every opportunity back to those things, even such that Otto von Bolschwing was in the United States. He was a commando, and then I think it was Helena von Damme was Ronald Reagan's secretary, and she was somehow connected to Germany as well. And that's another area of investigation. I think I do have her on the brain model when I go back to Ronald Reagan. And learning more about him, because he was involved in all of these things that were going on out there. Yeah, Helena von Damme. All these things that were going on out there related to these psychological operations. Vacaville prison, MK Ultra. Ronald Reagan was the governor at that time for some of those years. So let's see. Helena von Damme, SS translator of the German High Military Command Staff, governor and President Ronald Reagan's appointment secretary, helped fund Transcomputer International, whose president was her boss, SS boss, Otto von Bolschwing, ISS, bought by Albert Hakim, an operative of Baron SS von Bolschwing, and the Galen Org. Pretty interesting stuff. Yeah, so I would want to dig down into this guy, Daniel Graham, the Defense Intelligence Agency in 1981. And who was that guy? What did he know? Who was he connected to? All right, so I have one more zinger for you guys, but I wanted to see if you all had any input to that clip. All right. All right. So at the same time that this stuff, I don't know if this was 77 or 87, but West Point Daycare also had a scandal. And this is from October 16th, 1984, I think. So this is scandal jolts West Point, Washington Post. Two military families literally broke ranks, hired an outside lawyer, and filed suit September 20th in federal court, saying they were outraged at insensitivity of the inaction by West Point brass and the FBI, as long as parents remained in regular channels and did not make waves. So in 1984, I guess this was, yeah. So Giuliani, our friend and 9/11 criminal, Rudy, was attorney for the Southern District of New York, probably the most corrupt district in America, and allegations began to surface about the physical and sexual abuse on the children at the daycare center at West Point Military Academy. And they were addressed by officials in a significant manner after a 3-year-old girl was seen by a military physician for a lacerated vagina. And so 2 of the alleged abusers were civilian workers at the daycare, and the matter was turned over to the FBI. And Giuliani was in charge of the case. He failed to indict anyone for the case. And the parents filed suit and were awarded $2.7 million. So we have 2 members of the staff. They got removed and laid off, or they just got hidden. So nothing happened to them. And there were multiple children being abused, of course. He didn't indict anybody. And he did 950 interviews, 60 FBI agents. And they just kind of buried it. And here's Rudy in all his glory down below. I mean, what could go wrong putting this guy in charge of the operation? And yet he's hailed as a 9/11 hero by many. And I don't know like what the parallels are between the Presidio Day Care and the West Point daycare abuse. We'll probably have to deep dive in there a little bit further. I think May does have more to say about that. I wanted to get that out there on the record for you guys. All right, well that's about it for the information dump. I appreciate you all jumping on. Do you all have any like recollections of these events or sources or information or other things to investigate coming out of this? I see that Adam gave us a few links to the psychological operations and tactics, techniques, and procedures. And he was a part of this 15th psychological operations battalion.
Just who was it that was married to Roman Polanski? Was that
Sharon Tate.
Sharon Tate? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just recently watched that movie Chinatown with and man, I'm telling you, as far as kind of the child abuse stuff, man, it still kind of shocks me that the ending of that movie, it was rough to say the least.
I don't remember what happened, but
well, it's like, you know, the one of the main characters, woman, is a daughter to the John Huston character, and essentially they had a child from him molesting his daughter, his granddaughter, and in the kind of one of the final scenes, John Huston, the guy that's the character that John Huston is playing, is trying to get the granddaughter to go with him, and it's just, oh man, it just makes my stomach turn, man, just even watching that.
Just horrible, right? And the art imitating life, I suppose, these things happen and then they make movies out about it. And like, here's Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, and then here you got Mike Myers doing his Austin Powers.
Yeah,
got to be the same deal. But she was 8 months pregnant when they were killed.
Yeah,
by the Manson family. Yeah.
Ah, man. Yeah, the child trafficking and stuff, and of course, like they were saying about ritual child abuse, and the idea that you can do like split personalities if you were to molest the children at a really young age, around 3 years old. That would be create that traumatic effect that would give them a split personality where they could utilize them to, pass information and so forth, government information, and act as spies and stuff like that. At least that's the reasoning that they give in that regard. And oh man, it's just some really nasty stuff.
Yeah, Juliet had a lot to say about that. Yeah, ugly, very ugly. And I didn't play some of the things that May said were going on with the ritual abuse. It's just really too much for me to stomach. And we're talking with Juliet, we try not to get into too much detail because it is really disturbing.
Well, it's always interesting when they claim national security for stuff that involves child abuse.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is kind of the third rail, right? People, if they get too deep, they get whacked for digging into this stuff. You want to stick to the publicly available information, that's for sure. Around the frequent scandal, and then this is when May got her fast acting cancer, when she started to dig deep into this. Yeah,
it's a really rough area. I did have a chance to talk to he was the FBI guy that was in charge of the FBI office in Los Angeles, Ted
Gunderson, yeah, Gunderson, yeah.
Yeah, I had dinner with him on a couple different occasions, and you know, he offered a lot of evidence in regard to this particular area, and I just was like, I don't want to go down that. It's,
Well,
you
it's
know,
really,
that's
yeah,
like I said, isn't it? Oh, sorry.
yeah, it's really dark, and it takes a strong stomach, and it leads to some pretty dark places. But well, I'm hoping that like this was helpful for you all to see how we utilize the board and the brain model, and then digging into a little bit of audio history, and then also a lot of it offline would be digging into the documentation, bringing relevant information in quotes, and arranging it into a presentable format that would be interesting and hopefully get people charged up to go do a bunch more research. Justin, do you have any feedback on how we use the board, or? All right. Well, I think we're going to call it for the evening. I really appreciate you all, your kind attention and attending, and I really like doing this, going down the rabbit hole. And it's when I first started listening to Tragedy and Hope and listening to all of Richard's podcasts, and thinking about how he put everything together. And there's really no substitute for just going out and trying to do it. And having listened to May's work for all these years, and she packed so much into an hour that I couldn't possibly decode everything that she told me without adding a bunch of context and doing the research. But as I go forward and begin to make the connections, the learning comes faster and faster, the connections comes faster and faster, and it's just very intriguing and satisfying. And even when it's ugly, to understand what's going on in your world, and maybe keep your family and your friends' head out of the alligator's mouth every now and then if you can. So thank you all. Good night.